Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kiara Simmons-Wood, and I am the Events and Marketing Executive at Charity Digital. I'll be your host for today's session and would like to give you a very warm welcome, whether it's your first time joining us or you have attended a webinar before. Today's session will be delivered by Lisa Rowland, Events Manager at Charity Digital. The session will cover the fundamentals you need to know about how to organise an event, whether it be a fundraising gala, an exhibition, or a challenge event. Among other things, Lisa will cover how to plan your event from scratch, how to effectively procure and manage resources, and event fundamentals from health and safety considerations to stakeholder management. Before handing over to Lisa, I just want to share a few house rules. This session will be recorded, meaning that the recording of the session, the slides, and other resources will be made available to you within a week's time, so do not worry if you've missed something. We always love when our webinar sessions are interactive, so please do feel free to add any comments, share your experience and top tips in the chat section, as we'd love to hear from you. Please ask lots of questions at any time during and after Lisa's presentation by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And finally, if you encounter any sound or image issues, please do let us know in the chat and we'll do our very best to get back to normal as soon as we can. And without further ado, let me hand over to Lisa.
Thank you very much, Kiara. What a lovely introduction. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. So, as Kiara said, I am Lisa Rowland, event manager, leader, and strategist. So I work for Charity Digital currently, but I have a wealth of experience within the events industry, 10 years of experience, and across various industry and event types as well. So I've worked in the third sector in fundraising events, where I imagine a lot of you have too. I've worked for event agencies, and I've also worked more in corporate events like conferences and exhibitions. And an example of that was for the oil and gas industry. So yeah, a vast range of events that have ranged from conferences, exhibitions, fundraising events, galas, all sorts. And obviously with the pandemic that we all experienced change, and one of those big changes for me was moving a lot of the in-person events online. So I am a certified digital event strategist now, as well as an expert in in-person events. So with that in mind, today's session will be, my example for today's session will mainly be focused on the charity sector and fundraising events. I just want to note as well that this will be about in-person events, not online events. Just trying to get rid of the bar across the top there. I hope it's not too distracting. But yes, so it'll be about fundraising in-person events in particular today. So as you can see on screen here, these are a few examples of the events that I've organised within the fundraising and charity sector. So it ranges from colour runs to obstacle courses to memory walks to Strictly Come Dancing competitions and memorial events as well, and in memory events. So a vast range. And this webinar in particular today will cover the 10 fundamentals of planning an event. So I did a degree in event management, and that took me 3 years. So there's a lot to cram into 40 minutes today and to get through. So I've segmented it into 10 main things that I think which I focus on and that you should focus on as well when planning an in-person event. This is not an exhaustive list whatsoever, and I'll go into a bit more of the nitty-gritty as we go through, and I'll also be able to share some templates with you as well, so that you can kind of have a look more into detail around some of the finer details that you need to kind of confirm to hit these main milestones, I guess, and these main fundamentals when planning an event. So with that in mind, I'm going to use an example of a 5K colour run throughout my presentation today, and I'll keep referring back to this event type just so I can put what I'm talking about into context and into kind of, into context and into an event example itself. So going back to the 10 fundamentals, you'll see here, there's the first one I have mentioned is goals, objectives, and targets. So first thing I always do when I'm planning an event is establish the goals and objectives and answer the question, why are we organising this event? So what is the purpose of it? So for example, is it to raise funds? Is it to attract new donors to the charity? Is it to thank existing donors and volunteers? Or you may have also been tasked with organising a board meeting for the charity board and the charity trustees to discuss strategy. And these are really key things to establish before you even get thinking about the venue, the date and stuff like that, because all of these, a lot of those decisions will determine those decisions. So by establishing those aims and objectives, it will help you a lot with the planning process as you go through. So once you've established your why, you want to create some quantifiable targets so that the success of the event can also be measured. So this data can be used to kind of assess whether the event was a success, but also whether you might change things for future events and things like that. So it's really handy to have kind of those targets. And as I go through the slides as well, you'll notice I put a couple of top tips on here, just things that I've learned throughout my career that have come to mind that I think are really important. And one of the key ones for this is just make sure you're revisiting these objectives and these targets and aims throughout the whole planning process so that you can stay on track and you know that you're going to hit those targets. So as I said, I would relate this back to a 5K colour run as we go through. So the objectives for a colour run, I would think, so for my charity, my made up charity, would be to raise income, attract new donors to the charity, and then raise awareness for what we do as well. So like I mentioned, putting these into quantifiable targets, so actual numbers against them so that they're measurable. I've put the 1,200 registrations, 1,080 attendees. So the difference between registrations and attendees, so registrations are those that actually sign up to the event and the attendees are those that actually turn up and take part. So you always see a little bit of a dropout rate. So just make sure that you're accounting for that as well when you're doing your planning. To raise 40,000 in profit to be measured 6 weeks post-event, and then for 30% of participants to be new donors as well. So we've just established our aims, our targets and our objectives, and the next thing to think about are financials and your budget. So it's good to create your budget alongside your targets and your objectives so that you can set realistic targets based on your expenditure and your expected income. And this may, your income might differ depending on what area you live in. You may your charity may operate in more of a wealthier area than others, or you may have, it may be a bigger charity, for example. So all of that kind of comes into consideration when creating your budget. So also one thing to definitely do is find out if you have been set a budget. So talk to your manager or your leadership team and find out if you have a budget for your events yearly or whether there's one for this particular event. And that again will give you a lot of guidance in regards to how much you have to spend and how much you need to bring in income as well. So I've noted down here on the slides just a few things to consider for your budget. So venue, catering, equipment hire, shipping and courier costs, staff travel and accommodation, registration. There may be some costs associated with that. And then things to think about as well regarding income, which is ticket sales, how much funds are going to be brought in by actual fundraising from the attendees, and then anything from sponsorship opportunities as well. But when you are creating these things and you're putting these into your budgets, just think about reach out to suppliers and ask them for a quote and make sure that you're very accurate with your estimations, because the last thing you want is not to put enough money into the expenditure budget and it start eating into your income, or simply you just don't have enough funds in general to then pay for certain things. So this can be quite a timely task to do, so just bear that in mind and kind of keep that, make sure you allow for that amount of time. And then one thing I've popped here as well, my top tip for budgets, is ask for freebies. So when I did work within the third sector, I worked for a local charity, and a lot of the supermarkets, for example, had community budgets where they would donate products. Or so, for example, when I did a colour run previously, we got all the water and the biscuits, like the finish line snacks, for free from a local Sainsbury's, because they had a community budget, which was really to support charities. So make sure that you're reaching out to local businesses to see if they have that kind of spare expenditure, and make the most of it. And a lot of businesses anyway will try and help where they can. So yeah, don't be afraid to put out the ask, should you need to. Okay, so I have actually for today's example set up a few templates for you to use. So Kiara will share these in the chat. But there is a template for a budget in the link that will be shared. Again, it's not exhaustive of everything that should be included, but it's based on this colour run example, and it's quite helpful just to think about how it would be broken down. So feel free to use that and download that. And there are a few more examples in there of different for example, a Gantt chart and OKR planning, which you can also have a look through and use should you wish. So the next thing to think about, so once you've done your budget and set your objectives, it's really important to start thinking about a timeline. So when your event will be. And so what I always do is set the date for my event, obviously consider what venue you want, and make sure that they have availability and it's all within your price, your budget and everything like that. But once you have that date set, work backwards from that date and think about the things that you need to do a week before the event, etc., up until kind of 6 months, 9 months before the event, which it can take. Some events can take that much planning, and sometimes even up to a year. So I would kind of allow as much time as you can, and get as organized as you can early on for your event. But I always work backwards. But you'll see in the templates that Kiara shared that there's milestone planning as well. So these are the key things that that I always set that I need to hit. Really important things basically throughout the event planning process. And they have a lot of steps to kind of get to those points. But they're really good kind of markers of where you should be at certain times within the project. So I would always recommend doing some kind of milestone planning, and then a Gantt chart as well, which can be a lot more intricate details on what you need to do. So for example, ordering the water, sending out your supplier briefs, contacting sponsors, that kind of thing. So they might not be in the milestone planning, but they're obviously still key things that you need to do to ensure that you reach those milestones. So yeah, examples in the spreadsheet as well. The other thing I would say, which is a really important point, is make sure you allow some buffer time within your deadlines for any unexpected delays, which are kind of out of your control. So that could be things like suppliers not getting back to you in time, or sponsors being late with sending you stuff that you need from them. So always kind of set internal and external deadlines, and give yourself enough buffer time to be able to still hit your key milestones. And then things to also think about in regards to kind of like your venue and your event type. Obviously with a colour run, it will be outside, so this again will determine the date, the venue, all of that kind of stuff. So if it's if your event is outside, it's obviously better to plan it in the summer or the warmer months. Do you need to liaise with a lot of suppliers? And if so, make sure that they're really clear on what your deadlines are, and you give them plenty of time to meet those deadlines. And then also, I've just mentioned some project management tools here, which are really great to use. So Asana is something that I currently use, and I find it really helpful. There's a lot of automations on that that you can kind of set up. Once something's complete, it triggers something else, but it's just one workspace where everybody can work to, and it is something actually we offer on Charity Digital Exchange at a 50% discount for a year's subscription. So if you are interested in that, again, I think Chiara will pop the link directly to purchase your voucher for that in the chat. Trello is also a really great option for project management. It's a free tool. I think you get 10 Trello boards for free before you have to start paying. But again, you can tag, it's a shared workspace, but it's not kind of as sophisticated as Asana, but it's a really good tool to kind of keep everything in check. And then again, I love a spreadsheet like what I've created for you today. You're more that works just as well sometimes. So you can use that as well if you didn't want to use a system, for example. So these are just some of the examples that will be shared with you anyway. But one thing to note here as well is once your plan is ready and you're very clear on what you're going to be doing, make sure you share these plans with everybody within the team. I'll touch on resourcing a little bit later in the presentation, but it really helps with accountability throughout the planning process, that everybody will have their roles and responsibilities, what the deadlines are, and there's no kind of excuses then if there is any delays or any mishaps when it comes to kind of meeting deadlines. So yeah, that would be one key thing that I always do as well, and have a kickoff meeting with your team. But again, we'll touch on that in a little bit. So next, number 4 is the marketing for your event. So some charities are lucky enough to have a marketing team, and if that's the case, definitely pull their expertise in on this. That marketing is not my forte. I'm very much logistics based, but luckily I've always worked in places which have a marketing team, and I always make sure that I'm liaising with them on all these kind of things. But just as kind of an overview of things to think about in helping to promote your event is social media, paid ads, if you are able to allow some budget for that, email marketing and newsletters, which really, if you have a database, this is kind of free advertising for you. So make sure that you're utilizing all of those, all of your email marketing as much as possible. And then think, as well as paid ads, but think about any printed ads you could do around the local town, any posters that you could ask local businesses to put up for you. And if you are in a venue, so not for the colour run, but say for a Strictly Come Hospice or Strictly Come Dancing competition, a lot of the time the venue will put up a poster for you. So just make sure that you're asking all of those questions and you're getting as much as you can out of the suppliers that you're using as well. And then ask any like local businesses or local councils to promote on their social media sites as well, even if it's a case of just sharing, right, retweeting or sharing the posts that your charity puts out for the event. It all helps with reach and will ultimately result in registrations. So the other thing to think about is contra deals. So contra deals are when you work with other businesses. There's no kind of monetary exchange between the two, but you basically help each other promote your activities. So if there's any other local charities around nearby, or any local businesses that would be interested in doing this, it's definitely worth doing. And then the last thing is outreach. So the one thing that you can do is create an outreach pack, which might include some tweets or social media posts and that kind of thing that you've written up. So there's not a lot of work for the person sending them out at all, and just send that on to whoever you can and then ask them to promote that for you. Corporates are very good at this. Also, ask your volunteer base to help with this, because a lot of volunteers where I used to work, they were part of other community groups. So churches or scouts groups and stuff like that, and just asking them to then share to their network, you're getting so much more reach by doing that. So that's something that we do at Charity Digital a lot, but it's something that I would definitely highly recommend. But ultimately, if you do have a marketing team, let them take the lead on this. They're the experts, and obviously just liaise with them to make sure everything is on track and that you're hitting your registration quotas as well. So on to resourcing. So this is all about who needs to be involved in the project. So I mentioned that once you've got your budget, your aims and objectives, and your plan in place, this is where I would kind of hold the staff kickoff meeting and get everybody in that meeting that needs to be involved, and brief them on what the project is, or what the event is, what the aims are, and what their involvement will be. So really clear on the roles and responsibilities that will be in their remit as well. But I usually think about resourcing in 3 different stages. So I think of it as pre-event, on-site, and then post-event. So pre-event, you'll probably need a lot of hands on deck in regards to the different teams that you may need to liaise with. So marketing for marketing, the other fundraising teams. So for example, individual giving or community, because they may help you with promotion and stuff like that as well. And usually it's the fundraising team that help on site as well. So it's kind of good to keep them in the loop in the run up to it, so they've got a clearer overview of exactly what will be happening on the day. Facilities, in case you need to talk to them about insurance. So there's lots of different parties that would be involved, but I would say kind of sit down and have a proper think about who should be invited to that kickoff meeting and who needs that initial brief, and kind of told that, okay, we're going ahead with this and we're starting. So then, like I say, on the day, so on site, I would then hold a kickoff meeting with that team kind of a week before the event, to be able to brief on their roles and responsibilities for the day, because they will completely change. I remember when I worked at a charity before, the roles that people would end up doing are completely different to what they would usually do in the office, and that kind of thing. So really good to have a really clear understanding, giving them a really clear understanding of what your expectations are of them on the day. And then post-event as well, who needs to be involved? The team will be much smaller post-event. You still might want to involve marketing at that point to do some thank you posts on social media and stuff like that, as well as helping you gain responses in the feedback survey. But it usually comes down post-event to the event teams. There's a lot less to do, but there certainly is still quite a lot to do post-event. So yeah, break it down into three sections. That's what I do anyway, and then it gives me a really clear understanding of who needs to be involved and at what point. And then obviously think about volunteers as well. For a 5K run or colour run, you will need probably about 30-35 volunteers en route, stewarding the route. So you need to start your volunteer recruitment way ahead of the day. I would say months ahead. Yeah, get as many volunteers as you can on board. And even if you oversubscribe on volunteers, that's fine. I always think you'll be able to find everybody a job, but as long as you want more than less, that's for sure. And then just a top tip here as well, send a calendar invite to all staff required on site as soon as you can to help alleviate any clashes. So block it out in their diary to make sure that they're aware that they're needed from this time to this time, and that they will be there for the event as well. there's nothing worse than getting on site and getting volunteers drop out or staff, and you then having to move people around on the route and stuff like that. So as the earlier you can make sure everyone's going to be there, the better as well. So the next thing to think about is registration. So this is a huge part of event planning, and for most events, especially ones like colour runs where the numbers can be kind of in the thousands, this is kind of a job on its own. It's a big thing, and the amount of queries that you get in and just customer service that you'll need to give before the event, it's really key that you have kind of a dedicated person just kind of watching registration, or that kind of being the majority of their job. So many questions to ask yourself when you're thinking about registration. So how will you receive registrations? Do you have an internal CRM that can do this, or do you need to use an external supplier? If so, if it's an external supplier, Eventbrite is a great option. They do take a slight commission from each registration. I think it's a very small percentage, but if you don't have an internal CRM that can manage registrations, then it is a great option, and it's free to use as well. Well, it's not free to use, but it's free for everybody to use, and really simple to use as well. So it's a really good option. Other things to think about: will you accept invoices for payments? And kind of, if so, what's the process for those? Is it an email? Can they is there an option to select to be invoiced for your registration instead of paying with a card at the checkout point? So these are all things to kind of consider before you set up the registration and go live with it. Also, really important to think about your terms and conditions. So will you accept refunds or and give refunds? Will you accept name changes? That was one thing we used to get a lot of at the charity, especially the week before. It would always get a little bit crazy with people not being able to attend and switching to other names and stuff like that. So what are your policies around that? And being really clear again that whoever answers the phone, so it might be reception staff, or you might have somebody in fundraising that answers calls and stuff like that. If that's the case, be really clear with them and let them know exactly what the process is to kind of stop any confusion around those kind of things. Secondly, will you allow on-site registrations? If so, how are you going to process those? They're all things to think about. With a colour run, it's likely you're going to be in the middle of a field, and registration will be in the middle of the field as well. So are you going to have internet connection for a card reader? So again, it's just thinking of those tiny little details about the logistics of exactly how it will work. And like I say, registration is such a big part of an event that it does take a lot of planning even to get the registration live. And then also things to think about, like, do you need wristbands? Do you need badges? So for a conference, you might need badges. For a colour run, you may need wristbands. How will these be printed? You need to obviously account for this in your budget when you're budgeting in the first place. And is it all the same colour? Are you going to be are attendees going to be going off in waves? So kind of 9, 9, 10, 9, 20. Can you make it visually easier for staff to see who's in what wave by having different coloured wristbands and stuff like that? So yeah, lots to think about in registration, and yeah, a big part of the event, which is why I said I would always kind of dedicate one person to registration, or that be the majority of their role for the event. So data fields as well is a really important thing to think about at registration. This is going to help with your post-event analysis in regards to your success, so measuring your OKRs, but also it's really important regarding health and safety that you capture some of this information. So for example, dietary and accessibility requirements. Where did you hear about the event? That will help the marketing team or yourselves, if you're doing the marketing for it, to use the avenues that most people have come through again, because they're the ones that work. So it will help streamline what you should be doing if this kind of is a first event of its kind. Why do you support our charity? That's always a really good good insight to capture. Emergency contact details, especially for high risk events, which runs, obstacle courses, that kind of thing, they are. And you may need to use those on the day if someone has a trip or a fall, which can be quite likely for an event like a run. And then, is this your first time fundraising for our charity? If you remember back to the OKRs, one of them was that 30% of attendees at the event should be new donors. So again, this will help you measure that OKR and see how you've done against that target. One other thing to think about, I know a lot of fundraising events provide t-shirts or water bottles or freebies of some kind at the event. I would now, which we have started doing at Charity Digital actually, is asking whether you want one or not, because some people will opt out. They may have done 5 colour runs before and they've got a t-shirt that they don't mind wearing again, but it just helps be a bit more sustainable. It helps save cost. It helps with any not having too many leftovers, which you're then left with and you've got to dispose of, or yeah, so always ask a question like that as well. So for example, for the colour run, do you need an event t-shirt? And then just order the amount that you need for the event. So health and safety, another super important point, and you'll probably notice as I go through these 10 points that within each of them there's a lot to think about, which is why I said kind of these are more like milestone, like umbrella topics, I guess, and then you've got everything that kind of falls within them. But risk assessments, I've noted here just a few of the things to think about, but again, this list isn't exhaustive. Insurance, do you need to take out an insurance for the event? And again, the tip here is check with your charity or your facilities manager, if you have one, if your liability insurance actually covers events. So some will, so you won't have to add a premium or anything like that, and that's more kind of the low risk events, whereas the insurer colour runs, or actually I think colour runs were included in our liability insurance at the charity I worked at, but for example the obstacle race wasn't, and you had to pay a premium. But if you can save on insurance because it's already included in the liability insurance of the charity, then make sure that you ask those questions, because yeah, that makes your life a lot easier as well, not having to take out that insurance. And then the other thing to think about is waiver forms. So Kiara will share an example of a waiver form. So this is from a colour run company actually that do their own events, and I found this online, but I wanted to give an example of it. But waiver forms basically their liability waiver form. So the attendee will sign that if they have a trip or any injuries, that the charity is not liable. Helps protect the reputation of the charity, and is something that every single attendee at a kind of a running event or a challenge event of this type should sign. So again, you need to think about the logistics of how you get that signed. So is it that everybody needs to bring a paper form? Can you send them kind of a PDF which they return, which they can electronically add their name and signature? Is it a case of just adding a tick box at registration that they've read the waiver form and understand that your charity is not liable for anything stated in the form? So again, it's just thinking about this before it's too late. So what you don't want to happen is to have 300 registrations come in, and then you're like, oh, okay, we haven't done the waiver form, you've got to go back to those 300 people. So yeah, just thinking about that in the first instance, but a really, really important point. Just on the risk assessments as well, if you are using a venue, so for example, a theatre for a Strictly Come Dancing competition or something like that, they will have risk assessments, they will have fire plans and all of that kind of thing. So just make sure that you request all of that from them, and that you have that on file as well, so that if anything unforeseen was to happen, you've got all of that information with you or on record. So the next thing to think about is stakeholder management. So aside from registration, I would say this is another really big task, and this involves kind of stakeholder management for suppliers, sponsors, attendees, volunteers, staff. There's a lot of people management in this one. So I always think of this, or I would think of it in a charity, of how can I split this out? So would it be the event manager like myself managing the suppliers, and then the sponsors would be handled by a corporate fundraising manager? The volunteers, you may have a volunteer manager. Or if not, you may need to manage kind of all of them. That's fine too. You just might need to take a bit more planning in regards to kind of deadlines and what you need to create for each of these stakeholders. So one thing I would suggest with stakeholders is giving really clear and concise instructions, and as early on as possible. So for example, with sponsors, you could create a shared folder or a shared drive, which would contain things like your sponsor brief, shipping, delivery labels, that kind of thing, so that they all have access to one space and they can just download what they need in their own time, instead of kind of having to send everything out via emails or in separate emails as well. That's one thing that I've learned over time. I would send things in separate emails, and then it would just become very confusing. So if you can house everything they need in one place, that's the easiest thing to do. With your timelines for kind of sponsors and suppliers and things like that, always leave a lot of buffer time for what you need from them. So for example, if they receive some registrations within their sponsorship package, I would always ask for those kind of 2 weeks before I actually really need them, because it's always there is always a delay. A few sponsors will get them to you in time, but in my experience, there's always quite a few outstanding by the deadline. So again, just make sure you've got a lot of buffer time in there. And then make sure you're checking in with your stakeholders as well, kind of 3 weeks before the event, and make sure they have everything that they need. If they have any further questions, some suppliers, for example, may need to do a site visit, especially for like a colour run, if you've got a couple of obstacles on the course or something like that. If you're hiring those externally, the company may want to come in and do kind of a site check to make sure, to check where they're coming in and out of the park, and that the grounds all as they saw kind of 4 or 5 months ago when they first looked at it. So yeah, just check that you've scheduled all of those in as well, and that 3-week kind of check-in point will mean that you've got enough time to schedule them in as well, should you need to. There's so much on stakeholder management that I could go through. I could break it down into each individual group, but unfortunately I don't have time for that today. However, I have put together a little kind of brief of what I would include in kind of a supplier brief. So none of these details are accurate, by the way. I've just made everything up, but obviously the date, arrival time, what time you expect them on site, and obviously allow for setup time before the event goes live as well. Address, how they get into the park. If you can, include something visual here. So whether that's the sign that they'll be looking for or a map with kind of an arrow of exactly where it is, this makes things a lot easier and saves on a lot of phone calls on the day from suppliers. Exactly what you want them to bring, so equipment, and then exactly what you need from them on the day. So for example, a photographer, it's great to capture the event and like allow attendees to have the photos afterwards to share kind of with their networks, but also this is a really great opportunity to capture content for future marketing campaigns. So have a think about that, and think about what you want those photos to be. So warm-up photos, start line, the first line crossing the finish, the first person crossing the finish line, yeah, just make sure it's really clear that these are definite certain things that need to be captured on the day. And then it's the big day. We've arrived. We've gone through our Gantt chart. We've managed all of our stakeholders, and registration's all gone smoothly, and we are on site. So this is a list here of documents that I would prepare for on site. These will change for every single event type. Every event will have different things. That some events might not have some of these things, but these are the things that I would put together. So just to kind of talk through what they are, obviously a staff briefing document is just really clear instructions for staff, what roles and responsibilities they'll be doing on the day, as well as clear communication instructions. So who should they call if there's an emergency? Who should they call if they just have like a general question? Because although the event manager is the person to look to for that, if they are also managing the suppliers, helping with registration, setting up the course and all of that kind of thing, it's a really good idea to kind of think about whether somebody else could take that on and handle that on the day. Running order is a list of basically like an Excel sheet of minute by minute of what needs to be done on the day. And this is, again, really helpful to put those minute details on. So it might be things like putting up the sign behind registration, or making sure you're taking the water to water point 3 on the course, and that kind of thing, because they're things once you get on site and you're busy and everyone's calling your name and wants your attention, that running order allows other people in the team that might now have 5 minutes spare to actually read that through and go, okay, Lisa actually can't do that right now, she's doing that, so I'm going to go off and help her out with that. So that's just a really helpful guide for everybody to have that. Staging guide, I call this my Bible on site. It has everything I could possibly need in it regarding the event. So supplier information, AV, sponsor information, course maps, volunteer briefs, everything. It's my one-stop shop should I need to refer back to anything that's already been sent out, or need a reminder of any of the information on site as well. So that's just staging guide. And then I won't go into too much detail of the other bits, so I want to make sure we've got some time for Q&A today as well. But on-site comms plan, so again, who should be talking, who should other staff members and attendees be reaching out to, floor plan and site plans. And then if you can, at this point, if you have any promotional materials for future event, this is a future events. Sorry, I'm just gonna have a drink. If you have any promotional materials for future events, this is a really great time to get them in front of an audience that already are engaged with your charity. So if, apologies, too much talking, it's telling me that it's time to come to an end, but we're almost there. So this is a great time to get your future events in front of the audience, in front of an engaged audience. And also, if you can announce the date of the same event in the next year, so say it's the colour run on the 27th of May, and you've scheduled it, you're able to use the same venue again, and you've scheduled it for May 10th next year, announce that date here too. It's great, because people will have a great time, they'll be really enjoying themselves, and straight away they'll think, right, yeah, I want to do this again next year. And if you can get kind of registration open, or even give, if budget allows for it, a discount code of some sort to those returning to next year's event, it's a great way to get sign-ups way ahead of the game. And then finally, post-event evaluation. So this is where we're going to cut. This is the point where you look back at your targets and your OKRs and see if you've met them really. So always hold a staff debrief. This really is for internal processes to iron out anything that could have gone smoother and get their feedback. there is only one of you, so if you can't be everywhere on site, so something may have happened that you are not aware of, that the process could be smoother next year. So this is really handy to kind of get everybody's feedback, and collate that and then make improvements for next year. Budget reconciliation, so seeing where you've come in on, whether you've come in on budget. A feedback survey, so again, this is for attendee feedback really, and you can add some questions in here which will help measure your OKRs. So again, about the was this your first event, and the NPS score as well can be measured through the feedback survey. And then your thank yous, these are usually done kind of the week after the event, but attendee thank yous, sponsors, suppliers, local businesses that may have helped you, volunteers, all really important. Make sure you send your thank you emails as soon as possible. And again, I would always send 6 weeks after the event, I would always send another thank you email to attendees with some stats and analytics of exactly how successful the event was. So whether that's that you came in above, like your target was to raise 40,000, you raised 42, like that's great to share with them, and they'll really feel a sense of kind of helping towards that target. And if you can, measure the income against something as well for your charity. So what has that money paid for? And it puts it into context for the attendees as well. So that was my 10 fundamentals. There's quite a lot of information in there. I hope it wasn't too much, but I will I'd love to hear your feedback. So if you do have any feedback, Chiara will send around a feedback form at the end of this webinar, and please add your feedback to that, because it helps us improve our future webinars. But also my details are on screen. So if we can't get to a question today, or you do want to have a chat about something privately, feel free to email me or contact me on LinkedIn as well. But without further ado, I think we've got about 15 minutes left for Q&A. So Chiara, I will welcome you back and we'll take some questions.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks for this really insightful presentation. Having worked closely with you to put on an in-person event just last month, I can attest that your tips definitely work. So we've had a few questions already and planning for more, so I'll dive straight in. So the first question is from Megan and has been upvoted by 3 people. Asking, is there an alternative word for community budgets that retailers use? For instance, with supermarkets, would it be better to speak at head office or go in and speak to cashier in your experience?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, Megan. So I've actually never spoken to a head office. So we did have some corporate supporters that were through head office, but actually when it came to kind of donations for like water and snacks and stuff like that, we just went directly to the branch manager. So go in, talk to the store manager directly, and even if they can't, they might say, do you know what, we can't give you enough water for 1,000 people, but we can give you enough for 300, and they will probably give you something, and if that means a saving of saving somewhere, it's great. It's better than nothing. But yeah, in my experience, go in and talk to the store manager in the first instance. And if you say, you know, we're a local charity, and this is what our aim is, and this is what we're trying to do, and these are the people in the community that we support, it makes it quite hard to say no.
Fair enough, thank you. So we got an anonymous question saying, how can I manage stress levels on the day for both myself and our volunteers?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. I think we know how that feels, don't we, Chiara? So yes, like I mentioned throughout the presentation, be really clear on roles and responsibilities throughout the day. If you can have that running order with the intricate details of exactly what needs to be done at what point in the day, and let staff know about that, that's really helpful as well, because somebody can pick up a job that you're not able to get to, or that kind of thing. So that's really helpful. But also take the stress off yourself a little bit. You can't do everything. It is really difficult, and volunteers as well feel stressed because they're not used to kind of working in events, but and kind of the levels of stress that come with it. But again, with volunteers, try and assign them one job. And again, brief them properly, let them know that's exactly what they'll be doing, and try not to make too many changes to that. So you may have some volunteers. I remember we had some great volunteers that would volunteer at every event, and they'd come along and they'd be like, what do you need me to do? And it wouldn't matter, they would just do it, and it was great. For kind of newer volunteers, just assign them one job and allow them to do that job. Don't be switching it up on the day, because that's where I think it can become stressful, because then people don't really know what they're doing or where they should be. So yeah, I think kind of those briefs pre-event are really important for that. And again, there's no harm, I mentioned staff briefings, but there's no harm in doing a volunteer brief call, or asking volunteers to come into the office for a brief for half an hour, for some tea and cake as well, if you're able to do that as well. It's always a nice thank you for their time, and doing that and kind of alleviating and answering all of those questions and queries in the first instance.
Thank you. And off the back of that, when should you start recruitment for volunteers?
Yes, as early as possible. That would be my answer. So if you do have a calendar of events, so say you've organised them, you've got all your dates set for the next year, and if you are in that position where you have all of that, that is amazing. you're superstars. But
very impressive.
Yeah. But yeah, as soon as you can. So what I used to do is I would do a monthly volunteer newsletter, where I would list all of the volunteer opportunities that are up and coming, and ask people to reply with what dates they can commit to and what events they want to be involved in. And I'd create a spreadsheet, or I'd take note of everybody that replies and keep a document of that. So for example, if the collar run was in May and I sent this out in January, I would start getting volunteers at that point, which is great. Yeah. And I would just keep a record of that. But as soon as you can get the word out there that you're looking for volunteers, do it, because especially, like I say, for 5k color runs and stuff like that, it can be, you can need kind of 35-40 volunteers at a minimum, and it's quite a lot of people to find in a short amount of time.
Definitely. Thank you. So we had another anonymous question saying, what would be an example of a milestone?
Of a milestone? Okay, so this spreadsheet that Kiara sent has some milestones in it, which is, I am just going to get it up. It's just on my screen here. So a example of a milestone may be that you registration to go live. So we spoke about so many things about registration and all the tiny little details that you need to go into. So the milestone would actually be getting registration live. And as well as that, kind of another example might be like the website live. So you might want to put the website live before registration, and that's fine, because you're still going to be getting the word out there. You're still going to be getting the awareness about the event. Even if people can't register yet, you can have a countdown to when registration's going live and that kind of thing. I would also say kind of like confirming the venue would be a milestone. That's a massive key thing that you need to actually host the event. So those really big things, but there's tiny little bit of not tiny, they all take time and they're all very important, but smaller tasks that you need to do into the build up to one big thing, basically.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We're having loads of questions coming in, so I hope you're ready for all of these.
Oh, I didn't leave enough time.
So the next question is, do you have a suggestion of a great analysis report and the 6-week email to delegates that we could look at? Thank you.
Oh, I don't have one to hand, but I'm sure it's something I could put together, and we can send that out to attendees after this in the follow-up email, if that's okay, Kiara.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So moving on to a question by Tara, she said, we recently held our annual 5k fun run. Even though we had a registration desk and asked everyone to check in before the start, not everyone did. How could we accurately track attendees on the day?
Okay. So I would be interested to hear, Tara, if you had like wristbands or anything like that, because if you didn't, that makes it a lot harder to track. If what we used to do, if you so yeah, no wristbands. So if the wristbands I'm talking about are kind of the paper wristbands that you get, and they're super cheap, but it's a really easy way that everybody needs to come to registration to get their wristband. So when they're at the start line, anybody that doesn't have a wristband, it's really easy to spot them, and say kind of why haven't you got a wristband? Have you registered? Have you checked in? That kind of thing. Also, just make sure that your communications before the event, so the joining instructions that you send out to attendees, it's super clear what the process is, so that you must come to registration to check in, you must collect your wristband and that kind of thing, so that it's really really clear for them exactly what they need to do. But yeah, some kind of visual indicator for everybody to collect is really helpful to ensure that everybody has checked in on the day and that you've noted who's arrived. The other thing you can do, if you have the budget, sorry Kiara, I know there's a lot of questions, but you can get those like tags for your shoes. And again, it basically like will monitor like your speed and how quickly you did the race and stuff like that, but you would get access to that whole report afterwards, which then you would be able to cross-check to actually who attended on the day, which is helpful to have.
That's really interesting. I've actually heard of those before. Tara actually also added in that we also had someone comment on us giving out water bottles on the day. They're coming from the environmental point of view. Do you give out water at your events?
So I haven't done a fundraising event in a few years now, but if you can use paper cups or anything that is not plastic, that is better. I know some charities, what they've been doing at water points as well, instead of having like individual like 2-litre bottles or the big 6-litre bottles or whatever, they've been filling up one of those big kind of portable like taps. Does that make sense, Kiara? Do you know what I mean? Like the where you like to do,
I hope everyone else understands too.
Deposits water, and then that way you're just saving on the plastic bottles and stuff like that. But it's a really good point, and definitely things have ramped up in the recent years in regards to sustainability. So anything you can use that's like paper cups, and ask people to bring reusable bottles as well. You can always put that in your comms, attendee comms beforehand, that we encourage everybody to bring reusable bottles and what the reason for that is as well. So to be more sustainable and save on plastic that we're using. And most people will. I definitely would. So yeah.
Yeah, and I, on the back of that, would like to add on that we also are currently running a sustainability campaign. So if you have any sustainability questions, we do have a complete hub dedicated to that on the Charity Digital website. Just because, conscious of time, but we have a few more questions. So Julia asked, building on the asking for freebies question, what's the likelihood that local shops, etc., will support a fundraising event if the charity's focus is international rather than community that the event will be taking place in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I really have only worked at local charities, so I don't have too much experience in regards to international, but I do think a charity cause in general, a lot of businesses are really receptive to it, and I think I've reached out to a lot of local businesses, just kind of independent businesses as well, and they were really keen to give and kind of have that exposure as well, even if it's for like a raffle prize or something like that, and it's not for like water and stuff like that, because sometimes you just need smaller things as well. Then I would ask them, but I personally can't really comment on in regards to the international, but I do think that a lot of people are just receptive in general when it comes to a charity ask. So I would still go for it. Just make sure that you're being really clear on what the cause is for and how it helps, and I think that puts a lot of it into context of how that business can then help with the cause, and simple things like when, for example, like tin collection tins, we would provide certificates once they gave back a collection tin of exactly how much was in that tin, and they used to put it up in their shop, and it was a great way just to recognise that they were supporting the local community or supporting a charity in the local area, and it gives them a little bit of recognition for what they're doing as well.
Yeah, and I guess it's always worth asking.
Exactly, that's why I say if you don't ask, you don't get, Kiara. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, the worst they can say is no.
Exactly.
So moving on to Laura's question, she said, "Hi Lisa, do you have any tips for onboarding and managing volunteers?"
Yes, so this is volunteer management is really tricky, and again a massive part of a job in general. It's hard. I mean, onboarding, what my go-to was to reach out to local groups such as like the Scouts, Guides, with search and rescue. If you have a search and rescue group near you, they're always willing to provide volunteers for certain events, especially if the events are a bit more high risk. They're really good to go to for like first aiders and stuff like that. So have a look in your local area in regards to kind of recruiting volunteers of local community groups that you can reach out to, and like Scouts and stuff like that. They're always looking to do volunteering because it all adds to their badges and everything that they work towards in their group anyway, so that's really good. In regards to onboarding, I think it's really clear to understand exactly how they want to volunteer and what they want to do. So referring back to the question earlier about volunteers not becoming stressed or overwhelmed, make sure that you're understanding exactly what it is they want to do. They might be happy to help with registration, but kind of make it clear that registration can be quite stressful if it's for 1,000 people and everyone's registering within an hour or something like that. But some people might just be happy to kind of do the water stations or steward around the route, and that kind of thing. So understand what that is, and then just keep in regular contact with your volunteers as well. Reach out to them, let them know of the opportunities, let them know if there's anything else they want to be helping with. And then if you can, one thing I think was great is like a volunteer recognition event. So like I mentioned earlier, like if you can do like a volunteer briefing, but provide like some tea and cake, and it's just a nice thank you to say thank you for your time, because we're all in the charity sector. We know how important they are to making these events run, and just in general making charities run in general. So if you can do kind of recognition events and stuff like that as well, it's really, really helpful. But I think the main thing is just kind of maintaining that relationship and keeping in close contact with them.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time just for one last question.
Sure.
Asked, any tips on insurance's best practices that you've come across when working with lots of other orgs at your events? For instance, public liability.
That's a tricky question. So I'm not an expert on this. Our facility team would always kind of deal with this. But the best thing you can do is whatever insurance your charity is with now, there will be a phone line and you'll have a dedicated contact. Call them and literally say, I have this event coming up for this many people. This is exactly what's going to be going on. What do I need? And again, at that point, you can mention your suppliers, your sponsors, that kind of thing. So for example, for an obstacle race we reached out to a local business to donate some skips for us, and we filled them with water and people dived into them in the obstacle race, but obviously we had to account for kind of that getting on site and all of that kind of stuff, and it was in a public park, so a kind of a skip lorry coming into the public park to set up and all of that. I just called them and I said, this is the situation, will the premium that you've quoted for cover all of that? And then they will let you know what you need and what you don't need, and then just keep a record of those conversations as well. They usually do, to just make sure that you note down as well that you've spoken to them and who you've spoken to, so that if anything does happen, touch wood, it wouldn't, because you're doing everything you can to limit those, but if it does, you've got that information as well to fall back on.
Yeah. And you can always keep a record of all of the conversations on Asana, so you always have the correct timeline.
That's true.
Well, unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for today, but Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you all for being part of today's session on all the things related to event planning. We do hope you found it useful and are now feeling better equipped to put on a great event. If you could share your feedback with us just after you leave this page, that would be fantastic. And we hope to see you at our next webinar, which will be on how to scale service delivery with WhatsApp, SMS, and interactive voice response in 2 weeks' time on the 27th of April. But thank you.
Thanks, everybody.